Composition in the visual arts is about the organization of shapes, colors, and values within a frame. When we make still photographs, we're transforming 4 dimensions into 2. The 3 spatial dimensions plus time into a 2-dimensional image. I've long approached composition like a complicated game of Tetris, where the world supplies me with an unending stream of shapes and colors. When I play this game well, I give a path for the viewer to travel as they look at a photo. This path can be long or short, like a novel or a poem. After more than 25 years as a freelance photojournalist, landing clients like the New York Times, Getty Images, and the Associated Press for the last 10, I've learned that photography comes down to a few core principles. In this video, I'll share 3 of these principles and 1 strategy that'll help turn your ordinary snapshots into compelling photographs. In the first part, we'll take a look at composition and light, followed by the strategy to which I attribute most of my success in photography. And in the final part, we tackle storytelling. Composition is a lot about organizing shapes, and one of the best ways we can do this is by harnessing the powers of contrast. Contrast is the difference in values between light and dark, and the difference in colors. There are a million videos out there about the rule of thirds, so instead, how about we take a look at something else, the rule of edges. Instead of placing our subjects slightly off-center, we push them to the edges and corners of the frames. And with this rule, I hope to illustrate that rules aren't really rules. I've always looked at them like tools, starting points, or suggestions. The use of leading lines is one of the easiest ways to give our audiences a path to follow on their journey into our photography. Our job is to take them on a trip. One of the most powerful composition techniques in storytelling uses layers to signal context. These layers can be subtle or obvious. Political campaigns orchestrate this all the time. Typically, my photography starts with a subject and a background, and sometimes I work with a foreground. Sometimes I make use of more layers. Piggybacking on layers, a nested frame is a natural or man-made element in the real world that creates a frame around the subject, adding depth, context, and visual interest to the image. Of all the composition techniques, I find this one to be one of the most fun to execute. Composition in photography is much like composition in a song, the intentional arrangement of elements to create a harmonious result. If you're looking for a deeper dive into composition and photography, I've got a video linked just for you in the description. We can't have photography without light. The word itself, photography, comes from the Greek expression, drawing with light. Light has 4 distinct properties: intensity, color, direction, and quality. Intensity relates to brightness, has direct effect on exposure, and is relative to the distance between the subject and the light source. When it comes to color and light, there is more than meets the eye. We have obvious colored light, like we see on concert stages, but more importantly, we have to account for the difference in color temperature between sun, shade, and the sources of light in our businesses and homes. Color temperature is the measurement used to distinguish between warm and cool light, and it's measured in degrees Kelvin. Overcast skies give us about 7,000 degrees Kelvin, and in the shade of a tree or a building, we're looking at around 9,000. This is one of the main principles behind white balance. The lower the temperature in degrees Kelvin, the warmer the light. And this brings us to natural versus artificial light. This sounds like what it is. Sunlight, moonlight, lightning versus things like a camera flash, a lamp in our house, or a street light. And then it's a little bit confusing, but we have another comparison between light. Ambient or available versus artificial. Ambient or available light is any light source that the photographer doesn't introduce to the scene. So in our first comparison, ambient or available light can be both sunlight or a lamp in a house. The most traditional artificial light source in the latest comparison would be a simple camera flash. As long as the photographer doesn't introduce the light source into the scene, it's ambient or available. Light has direction. Just because your subject is in a well-lit area, it doesn't mean that your subject will be well-lit. Think about the differences when light hits a subject from the rear, the side, or the front. When you hear photographers referring to quality of light, they're talking about how hard or soft the light is. Hard light produces well-defined, sharp shadows, and soft light produces gentle shadows. And if you want to fully grasp light and its relationship to photography, the best way is to look at shadows. And if you're looking for practical exercises to learn more about light and photography, I highly recommend photographing still life projects. And you don't have to photograph just fruits and vegetables. Personally, I prefer toys and action figures. When it comes to my development as a photographer, nothing has helped me more in my journey than the pursuit of personal projects. Also known as self-assigned projects, these are the bridges photographers use to get paying clients, level up their skills, and make their best work. For example, when I was hired by Time magazine, the assigning editor referenced a bunch of photos that I'd made for a personal project about local musicians, many of which were my friends. Personal projects can be short or long term. They can last for hours or days, and they allow photographers to work on their own personal creative terms. One of the ways I've kept myself motivated to work on personal projects is by publishing regularly on my website and occasionally publishing photo books and photo zines. I want to be able to communicate something of substance when somebody asks me what I'm doing here with my camera. I want to be able to respond with something like this. I'm working on a project about X and plan to publish it in this manner at this time. The more details we can give about our projects, the more likely we are to be able to build trust and gain access. But that also means that we have to do a lot of thinking before we pick up a camera. If you've ever been challenged by imposter syndrome as a photographer, you're not alone. I've found the best way for me to fight this is by giving myself a good reason to be somewhere with a camera. When I'm not working on assignment, this means I'm working on a personal project. If you need to build or work on your portfolio, personal projects are the way to go. And if you're interested in learning more about personal projects, I've got a video linked in the description. Storytelling with photography is about two things. It's about the techniques we use as photographers, and it's about the actual stories that we're trying to communicate or pursue. The latter of which is about who and what we photographed, often about challenge, desire, and conflict, and fueled by curiosity. Most stories have a basic structure. For example, setup, followed by conflict and resolution. And if not, normally there's some type of progression in there. When using multiple photos to tell stories, vary your angles, focal lengths, and the types of shots you're making. This variety will help keep people wondering what they're going to see next, fueling their curiosity while also providing a rhythm to our story. Look for how facial expressions, body language, color, lighting, and backgrounds might help us tell better stories. If you'd like to learn more about storytelling with photography, I've got a deeper dive right here.